Okay, welcome everybody. This is Achyuta Bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Sun and Rising Sign horoscopes for the month of December. Now, usually I break the sessions up into, welcome everybody. Oops, this is Achyuta Bhava. Close that, have a double of myself. So usually I have separate videos for the four elements: water, earth, air, fire, etc. And that's typically the format that I use. But I thought it would be really fun this month, since I'm in the middle of my Kickstarter and fundraising, to do a live cast, a live webinar, and do all 12 signs in one go. We'll put some timestamps on these so that if you're watching it later, if you're watching the recording later, you can jump ahead to your sign. But yeah, I'd never done it this way, and I thought this would be a fun thing to do and maybe rally a little support for the Kickstarter in the meantime. So before I dive in, I will be going, just to kind of give you a sense of how this is going to work, I will be going through all 12 signs of the zodiac, looking at your biggest transits for the month of December, giving you a breakdown. As I go along, there's about 4 to 5 transits that I have circled this month, which I'm going to be focusing on. But as always, as we're going along, I'd love to hear some of your comments and stories and reflections on how you've been experiencing the astrology lately, the past couple of months, maybe what you're expecting or anticipating going into this month, especially as you hear the different house positions called out and the different topics that are coming up. How are you seeing this playing out already? I'd love to hear from you guys. Now, one thing that I find is a little bit difficult about this is that I'm new to doing webinars where I use Zoom, but cast it over to YouTube. So I'm trying right now to log in and make sure that I can track your questions on YouTube while I'm doing this, but just give me just a second while I get this going. Here we go. So, okay, good. Now I can see your questions, and I don't see you guys getting a double. The audio echo was there a minute ago when I first turned it on, for me at least. So hopefully this works out. Where are you guys all coming from too today? I'd love to hear where you're all from. I see someone tuning in from Istanbul. Hello. From Marseille in France. Beautiful, beautiful. That's really cool. So before I dive into Aries, we're going to start with Aries. We're going to move through all 12 of the signs in order. Sorry to be a bummer. If you're a Pisces, you have to wait till the end. Pisces always have to wait to the end. All the astrologers, starting with Aries, going around. Here is, I'm going to put into the chat box on YouTube. I'm going to put the link to my Kickstarter. What are we at right now? Let's see. We are at 270 backers right now. Our goal this year is 691. That's one better than we did last year. So we're always just trying to beat last year's record. There's lots of rewards you can pick up when you support my work. If you enjoy this channel, if it's a part of your daily spiritual routine, if you take it in even just once a week or once a month and you enjoy this work, please consider contributing something. If you can't contribute anything, prayers up are always appreciated. But if you can, that's great too. When you donate, and you can see the link I just put into the chat box, when you donate, you can pick up reward readings, exclusive lectures that I don't offer anywhere else. Just this one time a year, I do these lectures. I have one on Saturn, on eclipses, on the nodes of the moon. There's the Astrology of 2021 video. There's Sun Rising Sign horoscope videos for each of the 12 signs in depth on the year ahead. There's 50% off to all of my online programs. So if you're like, hey, I wanted to take one of your classes, this is the time of year where you can basically get it for 50% off the normal price, an extra $400 off the early bird rate. So it's a really good deal. Yeah, and I do, yes, Taco asked if I do individual charts. Yeah, it's on my website. But at any rate, so thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. We're going to dive in now and get going. Hello from Hawaii. Amazing. Iowa City, Austin, Boston, San Jose, Tucson, Finland, Baltimore, Tempe, Argentina, Jacksonville, Cleveland, Toronto, Bangladesh, Florida, Ireland, Michigan, Colorado, Phoenix. Beautiful. All right, guys. So thank you again for supporting my work. I'll ring the bell a few more times here and there as today goes on. Probably the best thing about the Kickstarter is this is my fire sale on my online courses that I do every year. So it's a great time if you're thinking of taking one of my courses, or if you're in one of my courses thinking of taking one of my advanced courses, it's a good time to save. All right, so we're going to start with Aries, and now I'm going to do a little screen sharing, and I want to make sure that this looks right. So I am just going to check and see if it goes up onto the screen. So let me know in the chat box if you can now see the chart on the screen. I just want to make sure that it's visible before I start diving in. Let's see here. Yeah, it looks like it's there now. Okay. Can't see it. Yeah, I can't see it, can you? A black screen. Hold on, let me see if I can get it. All right, let's try that. Black screen still? I think it's still doing a black screen. Let's try. Is it there now? Aha, there we go. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dive in. I hope that this works. I can't see the chat box while I'm doing this at the same time. So after each sign, I'll just check in and make sure that you guys were able to see it. But in the meantime, here are the transits that I'm laying out this month. I'm going to just write them on the screen so you can see which ones I'm doing. Now, I had to narrow it down. There's a lot of transits this month. If you want to take a look at my overview for the month of December, you can go back a few videos and check that out. There's other transits that I'm not talking about in the monthly sun and rising sign horoscopes, just because I want to focus on the really big stuff this month, and there's several really big transits worth talking about. So what are they? December 14th, we're talking about the new moon solar eclipse. So that's the big one. That's one of the big ones of the month. December 21st, we're talking about here we go. We're talking about Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in Aquarius. That's the next one. And then finally, we're talking about December 23rd, Mars square Pluto. So these are the three transits of the month that I'm going to focus on for each of the 12 signs, because these are huge, and your month is really going to be overshadowed. Any other transits of the month are more than likely going to be overshadowed by these particular transits. So that's where we're going to start. Now, let's go ahead, and I'm going to adjust this to the 14th so that we have that set up for all of our 12 signs, which is our solar eclipse. So let's start for Aries rising. We're going to talk about the solar eclipse if you're an Aries rising, or you can do these, by the way, if for your sun sign as well. But what you're doing then is you're using a kind of divinatory chart that's not modeled on your actual birth chart. You're modeling it as though you're putting the sun sign on the ascendant and doing whole sign houses for the 12 houses with the sun on the ascendant. I don't find that it's very natural to do so. People always get confused by it. But if you've ever read sun sign astrology, your sun sign horoscope is rooted in a chart that imagines your sun sign on the ascendant. So I recommend your rising sign, because that's going to coordinate perfectly with the layout of your birth chart in whole sign houses. So if I would say to go by your rising sign to get the most out of these videos personally. Now, if you're an Aries rising, first of all, the solar eclipse is happening in your 9th house. And that's the place it was traditionally called the joy of God. And it was a house associated with religion, higher education. It was associated with long journeys, foreign countries, basically the search for truth. Now, that truth could be political truth or philosophical or ethical or physical, like the laws of physics, or it could be related to theology or the nature of God or the universe in a metaphysical sense. So truth seeking in general belongs to this house, as does the system of law and governance. This is a house of law and lawmakers. The justice system as a whole is related to the ninth house. So when you have a solar eclipse there, you're thinking of a new beginning with a solar eclipse. It's like a new moon, but it's a mega new moon. So you've got a mega new moon in the house that's associated with religion and spirituality. Does that mean that there are essentially like new, what do you want to say? Turning off my phone here so it stops beeping. You could say that, for example, people go back to school when there's a solar eclipse in the ninth house, or they may find a spiritual teacher, or they may find a mentorship program of some kind. You may start teaching something yourself. Maybe you're a teacher and there's something that you're going to start teach, or a skill that you're mastering, or some new topic or subject that's coming into your life. Sometimes you're going to see the beginning of like legal disputes, or the opening of some kind of legal action. That can happen, unfortunately, with a ninth house signature. Traveling to foreign places, meeting someone from a foreign place, anything regarding foreign countries that suddenly becomes prominent in your life. These are the kinds of things to watch for right now if you're an Aries rising. And again, this comes in on the 14th. Does it happen right away? No, it takes a while. It can take up to 6 months, because remember that these eclipses come in sets. They're like wave sets for surfers. So do you catch this wave or do you catch the one in June? Doesn't matter. The energy's building right now. That's the main point. And you're going to see the play out of these themes becoming more prominent in the months ahead. You had a lunar eclipse in your ninth house last June. So there's already some backstory here, some momentum that's already it's already in motion. Okay, so that's the ninth house. Now, other things, maybe some other peripheral things, is that your faith, your beliefs, your values, your convictions are changing or transforming somehow. That's often coincides with ninth house eclipses if you're in Aries. So let's take that and let's see here. Now we're going to focus next on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Still getting used to navigating all my controls here at once. Sorry, guys. So Jupiter and Saturn are going to conjoin on the 21st. Let's move it ahead a little bit. And here we go. Let's put Aries back on the ascendant. So here's the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction. A huge conjunction, only happens once every 20 years. It's happening if you're an Aries in your 11th house. Now, what does the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction entail? The simplest way of understanding it is that it's like a changing of the guard. You think, for example, when a grandparent passes away and the next generation kind of takes the torch in becoming the elders. There's the sense of a new order, of a new way, of a changing of the times, or of a season change in life. It's very deep. There's a sense of respect for what has come before, but also a sense of inspiration about what's to come that's brand new. And they meld together in this really interesting way. There's also sort of like a new epoch, a new era, those kinds of, and it has the sense of, it's not a small event, it's not like a new era for the year ahead. It's a new era that really is set to define in some ways the next 20 years of your life. So it has this big overarching historical weight behind it. And this is happening if you're in Aries in the 11th house, which has to do with communities of people, allies, people that share similar aspirations or goals or dreams. It also has to do with friends, with community, with people that are somehow advantageous to us, a house of allies. This house is also about aspirations and wishes for the future. So something new might be introducing itself in your 11th house right now that is going to define not only different changes in your social life, but also some kind of vision or aspiration that's going to define many more years of your life to come, that's just getting started. It could involve a new group of people or changes within an existing organization or social structure in your life. But there's a sense of this hopeful new beginning that is very visionary feeling in the 11th house. It'll shape many years to come, but it could also bring a lot of changes socially in the year ahead, especially as Jupiter spends its next year in Aquarius. Not all of which will be easy. Saturn in the 11th house speaks to death to a certain extent, or decay, or the turnover or change socially it becomes really acute. So that's another huge transit that we're watching for everybody this month, and it's in your 11th house if you're an Aries rising. All right, so last but not least, we're going to look on October 23rd, December 23rd. We're taking a look at Mars, your ruling planet, making a square to Pluto. Now, this is the last big transit of the month. I'm just focusing on these three this month because they're so big. Now, Mars is your ruling planet. If you're an Aries or a Scorpio, you've had this planet in your home sign since late June. Then it's done its retrograde this whole fall season if you're in the northern hemisphere. And now it's pressing direct again, and it's going to move through one last, kind of big explosive moment with Pluto. It's had a few of them already. So you kind of think about what kind of personal process have you been through over the past 6 months or so. The first house, where Mars is currently located, is a house that was associated most intimately with the native, with the chart owner. Your health, your vitality, your strength, your mindset. And that first house is also, it's associated with your vitality and your sense of strength or potency, as well as agency. It's your will. And so Mars in that house has definitely taken you through something of a process of your individual sense of strength or power, perhaps being temporarily restrained or held in check or set back or prohibited somehow. Or maybe you've been getting some feedback on how to wield strength or will or power in the world. Now, it's been also on this crash course with Pluto, lord of the underworld. We're talking about Hades in the Greek pantheon, and the god of not only that which is subterranean, but associated closely with the unconscious and all that blows, kind of all the stuff that blows out from the underworld when Mars touches Pluto. So the great moments of catharsis and transformation and release that have a more willful, muscular, strong, assertive quality behind them. Well, you're going to hit one more of those moments here on around December 23rd. And it's going to tie in most likely to your work or your reputation or your vocation or career. So you want to watch for this as a kind of last defining moment of a long process that you've been going through since the end of June. So that's what I've got for Aries this month. Now, before I go forward, I want to check in on YouTube and just make sure that people have been able to follow me and see how that goes. Good. So good. Looks like you've been able to follow me just fine. I'm going to take questions at the end. So if you have a question about your sign, please feel free to, keep it around until the end, because I probably won't see it if it comes up. I just want to keep going through all of them. And then at the end, I'm going to open up for Q&A. And if you have any questions about your rising sign, I'll be happy to field them at that point. Okay, so I'm going back now. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put Taurus on the ascendant and do the whole thing over again. Okay, so, and let's go back to the 14th where we have our solar eclipse. All right, so if you're a Taurus rising, this is my rising sign. So I this one, it's always easiest for me to do my own rising sign, because like I have material to riff off from, Anyway, so if you are a Taurus rising, the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th is taking place in your 8th house. Now, this 8th house is so misunderstood. It's often associated with things like death, taxes, sex, like what's going on here, taboo. A lot of that in modern astrology is due to the association that people make with Scorpio. But in the ancient world, it actually has nothing to do with Scorpio. It has to do with the fact that planets in this house are getting ready to set and go below the horizon, but as of yet have not set. So they're awaiting this place where they disappear into the underworld. And they're also awaiting the seventh house, and the entrance into the underworld is the basically like walking into the courtroom where the jurors will, decide your fate. What happens to you based on your actions in this lifetime. You'll be judged in the underworld. The heart is weighed against the feather, so to speak. And so the eighth house has this sense of karmic debts and entanglements with other people that bear some mark of future consequence. There will be future consequences that come here. Sometimes you're rewarded in death when people die. Sometimes you owe debts or taxes, or people will come into your life and give you something. You'll get entangled with other people. I owe you something, you owe me something, karmically speaking. It's a very sticky house in that regard. It also has to do with the fear and paranoia that can accompany the knowledge that death or consequence awaits us in the future, which is why it's sometimes also associated with criminal enterprises, people that try to get away with something or escape future consequence, as well as the inevitability of future consequence, taxation, penalty, whether it's emotionally or karmically or financially, and also the sense that death is inevitable. But it's not just there's many houses of death in ancient astrology. For example, the fourth house, the seventh house, the 12th house, the sixth house, in different ways, can all be associated with death, and are. So it doesn't have the market cornered on death, but it does have this sense that future consequence, such as death, awaits or is somehow a part of this house. And so a solar eclipse in this house, long story short, can mean that there's something that's about to die, or that there's going to be some kind of consequence or penalty or fee or karmic debt that is due. And it's going to be, a bigger one. Sometimes people pass when there's solar eclipses in the eighth. Or sometimes the topic of death or mortality is just close at hand somehow. For example, a member of my family just this week had to have an emergency surgery to have their gallbladder removed. It's kind of one of those life or death situations. Not uncommon to see that kind of stuff popping up around eclipse season, right? Especially if they're going to land in your eighth house. It doesn't have to be death. It can be the feeling or mood of something being life or death, and of big hospital bills being due, so to speak. I know that's all scary. The other thing is that it can have a lot to do with the financial assistance or the windfalls or the benefits that come from other people. Something that you inherit, a gift that comes your way. The eighth house has long been associated with benefits or privileges or blessings that come from other people, including inheritance when people pass. So, and sometimes it's also just a place that has to do with the reality of the interconnectedness of our resources and assets with other people, not all of which is bad. A solar eclipse in the eighth house could mean that you're paying off debt. So there's something there as well. So this is your solar eclipse in this eighth house has a range of signification. Just kind of keep those in mind as this eclipse comes through. All right, we're going to go ahead to the 21st of the month. And whoops. All right. So on the 21st of the month, you're getting the, here we go. We're putting if you're a Taurus rising, this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is happening in your 10th house of career. So we're talking about a very new era in your career, a very new period that's opening up somehow. This is I would say it's one of the more auspicious places for Jupiter and Saturn to conjoin, because there's this sense of something new that's going to last a long time, and Saturn's in a good position. So even if there's a lot of work involved in something. For example, that, again, because I'm a Taurus rising, right? So one of the things that we're hoping to do based on how the Kickstarter does is to build out the platform of my online program so that there's essentially a better kind of web hosting for all of that material for students, and build out the school more and build out staff and stuff like that. So, that kind of energy should go very nicely, I hope, with Jupiter and Saturn conjoining in the 12th. You think of a new chapter in your life professionally. Maybe you're starting something new, a new craft, a new trade. Maybe you're expanding upon a base that's already there. Maybe you're achieving a promotion, or maybe the organization that you work for is changing in some way. But it has the feeling of a new era in your professional life. And that's genuinely, I think that this is mostly good. One of the things that it's going to push on, if you're a Taurus rising over the course of the year ahead, is Uranus in your first house. There's a lot of work required from Jupiter and Saturn in the 10th. Uranus in the first might prefer to be free and not so entangled by work and duty. All right, so that's the gist of the Jupiter Saturn conjunction if you're a Taurus rising. Now, the last but not least, we need to talk about Mars's square to Pluto. So Mars's square to Pluto is going to happen on the 23rd, and you can see here's Mars in Aries square to Pluto. Now, Mars in Aries in the 12th house. Again, you've been dealing with this since late June. Now, I can tell you as a Taurus rising myself that Mars in the 12th house is usually this feeling of having to sort of survive or live through different challenges. The 12th house is a place that is, in ancient astrology, is known for trying to, it represents something like, okay, let's say your ship is trying to go from, one port to another. Then there's all these wind and waves and weather that comes and tries to kind of knock you off course. And maybe you're part of what knocks you off course too. Maybe you're a captain who takes to the bottle too much or something like that. But the 12th house has this sense of influences that come in and try to lead us off course in some way. That's one of the main significations of the 12th house. Now, we can learn a lot from those influences and those experiences and become a lot like a seasoned veteran of life by virtue of going through those experiences. So it's not to say, oh, the 12th house, it's so evil or bad. But the Mars process in the 12th house has been what you could say, it's like one thwarting, challenging, oppositional thing after another. I could tell you, like, we moved during the pandemic, right? And then we had someone break into our empty house back home, and someone tried to steal my wife's identity. And my sister got in a car accident and then had to have an emergency C-section. My mom and her partner got COVID. My dad was in the hospital with heart problems. I had another family member recently who had to have their gallbladder out, like emergency. And there's some things that are more personal for me too, but it's like, that's just the vibe of a Mars retrograde in your 12th house. It's just like oppositional, Mars was the god of strife, right? So now at the same time, there can be this sense of working on something, working to get yourself back on track in the 12th house. Like, if you've lost your way, Mars in the 12th house is the fighter or the hero that has to like struggle through and kind of get their way through the difficult weather. So that's all reaching this culminating point on December 23rd when Mars hits Pluto, and there's this big catharsis. Now, Pluto's in the 9th house. Maybe this calls into question something about religion, beliefs, teachers and teachings, faith, things from foreign lands or foreign countries. So some of those topics could get involved around, again, with this last Mars-Pluto dynamic. All right, so that's if you're a Taurus rising. We're going to do this over now, and we're going to put Gemini on the ascendant. I'm just going to pop over to YouTube and make sure that you guys are all still there. Okay. Okay, yes, you are. Good. So Gemini on the ascendant. Well, the eclipse, which happens on the 14th, let's roll it back and put this up on the screen. The eclipse that's happening on the 14th, if you're a Gemini rising, is going to be happening in your 7th house. That's the place of marriage and relationships. I will tell you that I have seen over 10 years of doing this, one of the most reliable indicators of people getting together and eventually like having a long-term relationship with someone new coming into their life is a solar eclipse in the 7th. I'll never forget, I had an apprentice and she was like not in the market, not dating or anything. And she had an eclipse in her 7th house. And I said, you're going to meet someone. I have a pretty good feeling you'll meet someone. She's like, I don't think so. I'm not even dating. Um, she ended up reconnecting with someone. Um, they ended up getting, they were falling in love again, but they ended up getting pregnant, you know, and then I think it was ended up being like a year and a half later after the baby came and they kind of got settled and they ended up getting married too. But yeah, like never underestimate a strong solar eclipse in your 7th house when it comes to new relationships entering your life. The other thing that is pretty common will be that something major happens, usually for the better, like a new chapter of some kind for a spouse or a partner. They get a new job. There's some new new vision for their life. They're going back to school. They're maybe they're learning something new or developing a new product or starting a new business. You see the solar eclipse in the 7th sometimes not so much about meeting someone new, but about something new happening for or in the life of a partner. Now that could be, now the solar eclipse can mean, especially because this is a south node solar eclipse, that there is maybe some newness born of letting go. The south node is associated with decrease and loss. And so sometimes a solar eclipse with the south node in particular will represent the end of a relationship. It's kind of, it can be unique in that way where it's like a new beginning, but it's fresh off from realizing you need to let go of a relationship. So this one, usually I would look for lunar eclipses in the 7th to be more indicative of that. But you did have a lunar eclipse back in June if you're a Gemini, and now a solar eclipse here. So maybe there's just been turnover in this area of life in general. And that's why you got to look at the eclipses as sets of waves coming through that area of life. Right now, though, you're not, I mean, you won't necessarily see that right away, but do we have any other evidence this is a big month for relationships? Yeah, look, Venus is about to enter in, mid-December. Venus will also enter Sagittarius and pop into your 7th. So there's just a lot of action in that area of life. Now, it could also pertain to sexuality, your social status or interactions with the world in a more general sense are depicted by the 7th house. So how are you changing socially right now? How is your social persona changing? And then, the interesting thing is that the 7th house can also have something to do with the gods or things that are other than us that aren't just romantic partners. The other in a spiritual sense is often God or spirit, as opposed to, our own spirit soul, the larger soul of the universe. The 7th house was associated with worship of the gods and with people who were faithful to things bigger than themselves. That's an interesting thing. And part of the reason for this is because this is the place where the sun sets. And when the sun sets, the workaday world goes away, and we start looking up at the sky. You don't go to a concert in the morning; you go to a concert in the evening. Why is that? Because we join with that ecstatic otherness. We merge with others when the work of the day is done. So that when the sun sets, there's also this sense of the nocturnal space where we commune with others, sometimes sexually. Obviously, that's a nighttime endeavor for a lot of people, but it's also all the people in the world who enjoy morning sex are like, hey. But you know what I mean? Sexuality is like, it's kind of an evening thing. So anything that you join to that's other than or bigger than oneself can be a part of the 7th house. And that can also, a solar eclipse can mean that just something else that you become absorbed in or that's transcendent to yourself will come into your life. So watch for that in a general sense. Now, if we bring this forward to the 21st, let's take a look at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the 9th house if you're a Gemini. Gemini rising, that 9th house, that new era taking place in the house of the higher mind. And this is, again, like the Aries rising with the solar eclipse in the 9th house. Jupiter and Saturn in this house can indicate I'm going back to school, I'm finding a mentor, I'm finding a teacher. Or if you're a teacher, I'm teaching something new, or I'm developing a new teaching platform. I'm going to be traveling abroad, or I'm going to relocate to a foreign country. I'm going to take a trip, or I'm going to start developing a spiritual practice or finding a spiritual mentor. Very special teachers and teachings can enter your life in this month when Jupiter and Saturn combine in your ninth house. It's a really auspicious transit in my mind for your mind, for the development and cultivation of spiritual life. Now, it could mean, like, you could see this as someone going to law school or someone running for local office, because the ninth house is connected to law and lawmakers and things like that. But I think that another way of looking at this is that your beliefs, your ideals are suddenly going to become front and center for you. There's some philosophical awakening happening for you this month. And that's the way that I would probably, at the most basic level, that's how I would interpret this. Now, if we go forward for Geminis to the 23rd, that's when we get this Mars square Pluto dynamic. Now, it's happening in your 11th house to the 8th house. This means that there's a catharsis coming when it comes to the way in which you're entangled. There's karma, there's debts, and burdens and obligations and gifts being given and exchanged with other people, especially people that you would consider to be allies or within groups or friends. Some of this Pluto Mars could suggest confrontation or hostility or conflict around such entangled karmic relationships, probably more like professional colleagues or friends, or people that you share some political or philosophical affiliation with, or spiritual affiliation. Maybe the need to separate yourself from something that's toxic, or maybe some kind of blow up that's happening within a group or organization. Those would be kind of the heavier things to look for. But also, this could totally suggest some kind of catharsis that happens due to a creative collaboration, probably more with a sense of mission behind it, since Mars in the 11th tends to collaborate with other people when there's a sense of purpose, conviction, muscle, strength, and will behind it. So watch for that kind of energy to receive some kind of Plutonian form of support, deep, unexpected, showings of support or resources that appear suddenly. Remember, Pluto means riches, and so it could be that there's this, a richness coming to support some kind of endeavor, some kind of mission or project. I find that really interesting for Geminis this month. But don't be surprised if there's also very revealing conflicts that come up, and where you might have to part ways or sever different kinds of connections with people. All right, so that's what I've got for Gemini rising. I'm going to check into YouTube and make sure you guys are still connected here. Good. So, I mentioned this early, but if you have questions, save them to the end, because I will go over all of the questions about each sign and try to address specific things when I'm done with all 12. I know that means you're gonna have to hang around for a little bit, but yeah, that's the way I want to do it, just to keep in a groove here. Otherwise, I get exhausted, and then later signs get less treatment. So, okay, so we're going to go forward now to Cancer rising. We're going to put Cancer on the ascendant. This is my wife's rising sign, my best friend's rising sign too. So that's probably because I'm a Cancer sun, I guess. Taurus and Cancer. I have Taurus rising, Cancer sun. I get along well with Taurus and Cancers. Okay. So we're going to go to the 14th for starters. If you're a Cancer rising, this is the day of the solar eclipse. And the solar eclipse for you, if you're a Cancer, is going to land in your 6th house. Now, that one thing that you do have to be careful about with the solar eclipse in the 6th house is that, the 6th house doesn't always deliver nice solar eclipse presence, right? The 6th house was a place that was associated with toil, labor, drudgery, sickness, slavery. It's the hard work house. It's a house also that was associated with sacrifice. For example, laying down your life in service to the military, for the kingdom or the king or something like that. Also, the hard work that's associated with land and animals and like agricultural, like farming and things like that. It's kind of your blue collar. It's either like the blue collar house of the wheel. Your work isn't always seen or noticed or rewarded in this house, and that can be a really painful thing. Also, it's a house where there can be conflict and just trying times that you're kind of having to battle through. The house was called the joy of Mars and the house of misfortune. Now, it's also a house that's associated with, like Mars, martyrdom and selfless sacrifice or service, but usually in service to a cause or a purpose, um, or to some kind of great labor or great, like, Herculean task. Now, a new moon in this house can mean that there's a great new work coming into your life, or that you're going to be sacrificing something of yourself, and perhaps that something is something that you really love. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. The connotation of slavery is partially true for the six. Like, there can be a way in which you feel enslaved to someone or something. There's, of course, literal slavery back in the ancient world too, but this would be in our day and age, this would be something more like, I feel enslaved to my boss or my work or a job I don't like, or something like that. A solar eclipse can then, unfortunately, in the sixth, mean that that's a little bit of what's coming, that there's going to be a period of really hard work that's not necessarily enjoyable, but does it lead to something that, does it pay off in the end? Is it something that you really care about? Is there a sense of selfless sacrifice involved? That usually makes the difference. The other thing is, of course, that new moons in solar eclipses in this house bring health problems. They can bring, if you've had these eclipses since June. I remember the day of the lunar eclipse in June in the sixth house, my wife got a really bad, she got migraine and got really sick, and was, she ended up having like a kind of like a 24-hour bug of some kind. And that was right after the lunar eclipse in the sixth. It's usually not devastating stuff. I mean, I would say a low percentage of the time that I see eclipses in six people's house who are otherwise healthy end up getting, some devastating thing. But injuries, accidents, misfortune, sickness, these do belong to the sixth house. So that's something to be aware of. Persevering and working through something is a part of the nature of the sixth house. So don't get down. Remember that this solar eclipse is in a trine with Mars in your 10th house, so likely connected to something that will eventually bring some forward movement and success and achievement to your career. I think it's probably more likely with Mars in this position that this is related to work stuff, hopefully. But just stay aware of the potential challenges that this eclipse can bring up, and they don't happen all at once. Sometimes it's just one little thing. You're gonna get death by paper cut sometimes with the sixth house. It's just like, oh my gosh, thing after thing. But you when you go through these periods, they make you a lot more resilient, and they help very clearly define what you're willing to sacrifice or give yourself to and what you're not, right? It's kind of like the philosophy of the six is like, we're all enslaved to something, but are you choosing, what you're giving your blood, sweat, and tears to? So good thing for Cancers to be thinking, Cancer risings to be thinking about this month. Now, not all bad news, right? There's some other really interesting things happening this month for you. So let's go ahead to the 21st. On the 21st, now you're getting the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in your 8th house. Now, we talked about the 8th house already when I was talking about, I'm trying to remember who was it that I was talking about? Maybe it was Taurus rising. But, when you think about the 8th in general, again, you're thinking about debts, obligations that we have to others or that others have to us. What's so nice about a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the 8th house is that you're talking about a new era, a new beginning, a new chapter in life that's going to last for a very long time. And it has to do probably with positive collaborations coming in with other people, positive things happening. Say, for example, spouse is doing well or gets a promotion at work, or even, I've seen this kind of signature when Saturn enters the 8th or Jupiter enters the 8th as a partner is retiring, and there's going to be kind of the new period of life where they're receiving their pension or their retirement money's coming in, and it's like just a different reality that you're entering into in that relationship due to this big change that's happening in the partner's financial or professional reality. Jupiter Saturn in the 8th can also mean big investments, a big loan, a big a debt that's paid off. It can mean new revenue streams that join you to new collaborative, people or companies or partners. Jupiter and Saturn in this house can mean death. They can mean the end of a generation, like a generational turnover through death, like a grandparent passing away, or just that there's the end of something, and it's painful. For example, Jupiter Saturn in the eighth house. My wife's parents will complete their divorce in I think it's going to be it's in January or something like that. It's kind of interesting. Both my wife and I, our parents, both divorced as adults. So my parents divorced in 2014, and hers will be divorced at the very beginning of 2021. And obviously we're happy for all of them making the right choices for themselves. But it's so funny because my parents, when they divorced, Saturn was moving into the eighth. Isn't that interesting? So it's kind of like a death, but it doesn't have to be a literal death. It can be very metaphorical, some era coming to a close. And then there's the excitement that comes with the start of a new era. What does that mean? Well, like, for example, in the case of my wife's Cancer rising, we've just moved to Minnesota, and, in the process of selling our house back in Maryland, probably try to look for a new place here in Minnesota. Her parents, are splitting up. She was born in Minnesota. I was raised in Minnesota. So it's coming back home for us. So there's this weird way in which the Jupiter Saturn in the eighth, if you're Cancer rising, can be this turnover, a big kind of generational shift that comes through death. But there's also a theme here of a new foundation being established with new relationships and so forth. If we buy a house, there'll be a new loan. You know what I mean? So that's all very eighth house stuff. So watch for those kinds of themes if you're a Cancer rising. Now, last but not least, we have the major square between Mars and Pluto in the 10th to the 7th. This can mean that there are social and professional changes, or relational and professional changes that you're going through, some big catharsis around marriage and relationships, as well as, work in the world. So this kind of stuff coming up can mean that, I've seen this come up a lot of times when people are fired or hired. Sorry, I don't want to scare you all, but a change in jobs with anytime that a planet in the 10th squares Pluto in the 7th. But there can also be some new incentive, some new initiative, especially if it involves collaboration. For example, one thing that my wife and I are in the process of working on that fits very well is hers. I guess I keep drawing on her chart, but it's just easy stories for me to share. Starting to work more on the crossover between our herbal and astrological content. And there's been some things that we've been doing around that. So you'll often see Mars and Pluto work very well when it comes to initiating something, and it needs this big release of energy to get going, right? And that's good for Pluto and Mars. On the other hand, confrontation, hostility, conflict. I've learned long enough, being married, obviously, this is one that I'm circling on my calendar, being like, let's make sure that we're extra diplomatic with each other if you feel tension coming up around this time. And that'd be the case both in the workplace or potentially in marriages or intimate relationships if you're a Cancer this month, with Pluto and Mars squaring on the 23rd. Okay, so that's our Cancer rising. Let me just pop over to YouTube, make sure you guys are sane. Okay, so all right. Someone says Minnesota is so boring. Are you from Minnesota? I love Minnesota. I don't think it's boring at all. It's home to me, but I understand everyone's different strokes for different folks. All right. Let's see. So I'm going to put Leo on the ascendant, and we're going to run it back and do it over. So now we're going to put, let's do days. We're going to go down to the 14th. And we are now putting the solar eclipse on the 14th in Sagittarius in the 5th house if you're a Leo rising. So the 5th house was traditionally called the joy of Venus and the house of good fortune. And it's basically associated with the kind of stuff you do to have, like, the kind of stuff that you would do to have a good time. I'm going to the movies. I'm going for a walk in the park. I'm going to, I don't know, put a slip and slide out in the yard or something. Like, it's a place of pleasure. That's the gist of it. It's a place of pleasure and joy and fun and recreation. Has a little bit of the sense of frivolousness to it, or perhaps hedonism, or overindulging in things, as Venus can. Like, that's Venus's dark side, is, oh, the pie looks so beautiful and tasty, I'll eat the whole thing. So you always would be careful that Venus doesn't take us into just sort of carnal, like just kind of that voracious appetite to consume and enjoy. So that can always be that sort of edge to the fifth house, gambling or drinking too much or something like that. But it's also romantic. It's sort of sexy and flirty. It's associated also with children and pregnancy and childbirth, or not childbirth, just children and pregnancy in general. So a solar eclipse in this house, are you getting pregnant, or is a partner or getting pregnant? This is also a place that can point to like love affairs. Are you getting involved in something that's really intense? Does it have a real life or substance behind it? Well, this month it very well could, if you're a Leo, because you're also going to have Jupiter and Saturn entering your seventh, which we'll talk about in a minute. The fifth house solar eclipse with the south node can also point to more escapist tendencies. So you have to be careful of that. The south node in Indian astrology is associated with the desire for otherworldliness, whether it's meditation, maybe a little healthier, or it's, heroin, right? It can be quite a spectrum that the south node can point to in terms of the desire to escape mundane life. In the fifth house, that would mean pleasures that are otherworldly or that might be rooted in the desire to escape. So you do want to be careful of that. But also, if you think about the joining of art and culture to spirituality or transcendence, that might be a really beautiful match too. So those are kinds of some of the themes that you may notice with the solar eclipse in the fifth. Now, your children, the life of your children, things happening in your children's lives, that could come up as well with a solar eclipse here. Now, if we go forward to the 21st, here's why I think the potential for a romantic affair of some kind to turn into something a lot more serious is there for you if you're a Leo rising. Jupiter and Saturn will conjoin, introducing this new era in your life that has a long shelf life. We're talking about a 20-year cycle between Jupiter and Saturn, and that the seed of that cycle is taking place in the seventh house, marriage, relationships. Again, it could be something very new that's changing the story of your life with regard to something happening for a partner or in a partner's life. I've seen people have Saturn or Jupiter ingress into the seventh when a partner gets a raise or a partner retires or someone in a partner's family passes on. So it's really super diverse. But one thing to mention here, one thing to mention here is that it lasts a really long time. It has a long trajectory, 20 years worth of development that's going to come on the as the outgrowth of this seeding period. And also there's a sense of it's a new era in your life, relationally or romantically or sexually. I've seen people come out of the closet when either of these planets enter the seventh house as gay or trans or whatever the case might be. So you think relational, sexual, social change in a larger sense. Also, again, sometimes Jupiter and Saturn in the seventh, a new mentor or a new teacher or a new class or something like that is going to enter your life. So I think that's quite powerful as well. Now, let's go forward to the 23rd when we have Mars going through the square to Pluto from the 9th to the 6th. One thing you have to be careful about if you're a Leo rising, this is a moment of testing your mettle in terms of something that you've been learning or something that's been percolating in your life spiritually, philosophically since late June. I talked about this in a recent video. My Leo risings have been going through a lot with that Mars retrograde in your 9th house of the higher mind, of religion, beliefs, convictions. It's a big change happening there. And now there's a need to put that into action somehow. And there's going to be this big catharsis where you're either being tested or challenged, or the need to put faith or beliefs into action or practice is somehow going to become really important. You just got to be careful that you don't get zealous or don't get sort of, what do I want to say, aggressive in the way that you present your beliefs or actions, put your beliefs into action, that you don't become dominant or like a bully in some way, fanatical or something like that. But watch for there to be a very strong theme about the strength and potency of your beliefs and ideals this month. Culminates a long process that you've been through since June around these topics. So that's for Leos. We're going to do this over again now for Virgo on the ascendant. Let's put Virgo up and let's go back to the 14th. Okay. So if you're a Virgo, you know, we're going to go back to the 13th just so that you can actually see it's on the 14th, but I put it on the 13th. Here's Virgo rise, or no, I'm sorry. We need to I'm all messed up. Let's put Virgo on the ascendant. There we go. So if you are a Virgo rising, let's just see if I can push this forward to the 14th again. No. Okay, there we go. So if you're a Virgo rising on the 14th, you're going to see the new moon in Sagittarius in your 4th house. Very powerful place for eclipses. It's so big when they're in the angular houses, right? So all the mutable signs have the eclipses in the angular houses. The solar eclipse in the 4th house, place traditionally associated with the father, but also a place associated with land, roots, property, parents, ancestry. It's the place that was also thought of as the foundation of your life, your home, your wealth, your the inherent resources that you have that everything rests upon, and that acts as a foundation for your well-being or security in the world. Manilius, this ancient Roman poet, talks about the 4th house as less showy or flashy than the 10th house, out in the world, achievement, honor, reputation, but more substantive, because the 4th house is buried. You can't see it, but it's what props the whole chart up. It was called also the eternal base, the eternal foundation of the chart. So you're talking about your roots. You're talking about the foundation of your life. And when there's a solar eclipse in this house, it means that there is a new foundation coming in, or there are very deep changes happening around the topic of your parents or family life, your private and interior life, or the things that support you and prop up your life, which can pertain to things like wealth or money or property or land, things that give you that sense of having something to stand on. A solar eclipse here can mean it's a new beginning, not without a little bit of potential difficulty or challenge that comes with it. Part of that we're going to see when we see the Jupiter-Saturn dynamic, as well as the Pluto-Mars dynamic, which are happening in a few difficult places in your chart. But I'm optimistic for you as a Virgo, because you do have, on November 30th, you just had an eclipse in your 10th house, some changes happening there, potentially in your career, your work in the world, or your sense of direction in the world or purpose. And now it's touching in on the home space. So watch for those changes coming in. Now, here is on the 21st, we have the new or the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius in the 6th house. Now, again, this house is associated with hard work, strife, sacrifice, sickness, disease, slavery, but also the things that we have to work really, really hard for, and the work is worth it somehow because it's something that we believe in. Mars is like the joy of Mars, the 6th house. The joy of Mars. Mars is a planet that is associated with some degree of, I will lay down my life for this. I care about it so much. And so the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in that house, I've seen people have this when they get into recovery as an alcoholic. I've seen people have not just Jupiter-Saturn, but either of those planets respectively entering the 6th. That there is some sense of, I'm ready to do the hard work. And it's going to start a new era in your life to just square up and start doing something that maybe you've been procrastinating or not wanting to deal with. The worst thing I could see here would be if you've been avoiding something. Now you're going to hit this period where it's like, I can't avoid it anymore. Now I have to do the work. Now, what's interesting here is that the square that these two planets will create with Uranus in your 9th house suggests to me that there's two things going on. Your mind is ready for a revolution, Uranus in the 9th, but there's still a lot of the idealism has to be put into action. There has to be tangible effort, discipline, sacrifice made to enact whatever high ideals are coming into your life right now or inspiring you. So that's another piece of this for Virgos, that there's the need for a great work, a magnum opus of some kind, or some degree of pouring yourself into something like you've never done before in order for something to actually work out. Um, and you can see this even just a little bit, like by virtue of the fact that you're as this is coming through, we're also seeing in just 2 days later on the 23rd, you're seeing Mars square Pluto from the 8th to the 5th, a combination that can often speak to, like, if you've been frivolous in any way, if there's been a wasting of time, a wasting of energy, a wasting of your life in any way, there's going to be a bill that comes due with this transit. Mars in the 8th to Pluto in the 5th, suddenly your loans are pulled, or there's some asset or resource that's taken away from you, and now you have to do it on your own. That's the potential here. The other thing that can happen is that, on the other hand, you can find some great a form of support that that sort of galvanizes and stirs you to greater. It gives you an incentive somehow to work harder or to get going. The 8th house Mars can be indicative of a form of support being taken away, or conflict around some kind of collaboration, like partners that will split ways, or someone who will say, I'm not going to support you anymore. The government pulls its grant support or something like that. But there can also be this sense of, let me join with you, let's fight on the same team. So watch for those extremes to come in. But this is not a good, it's not a good time for Virgos this month to like burn bridges. If your option is between having to do it entirely alone and getting some help, but maybe with someone you have to make some compromises with, I would suggest the compromises, because the Jupiter Saturn in the 6th is just a strong sign of like a lot of like a labor that's to come in your life, something you're really going to pour yourself into, or something that you're really inspired by, but you shouldn't do it alone. I think that doesn't work so well for you this month if you try to go something entirely alone and kind of cut ties or burn bridges or get really self-righteous about it in the process. Maybe one more thing that could come up here would be the sudden, the crossover between the 8th and the 6th is a little disturbing. I won't lie to you. If you're a Virgo, this can suggest like death and endings, and catharsis that comes with something suddenly being terminated, something being over, and that might be the incentive that we're talking about with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the 6th, that because something ends, I have to start over in a way that's going to require a lot of work and sacrifice. And suddenly I find myself in a difficult position because something unexpectedly comes to an end. Now, I think you'll get through it. So I don't ever want people to like despair, but if that is the case for you, just remember that this is a great work. And one beneficial thing about the 6th house is that these planets, by virtue of whole sign houses, will connect positively to any natal planets in your 10th house or your 2nd house, which means the potential for productivity and work and finances will be there. But it's a new beginning of some time that's going to require some sacrifice in the process. So that's what I've got for Virgos. Let me know how you're doing, Virgos. I felt like you were maybe the most difficult one on my list this month. Let's go forward to Libra rising. Now, for Libra rising, we're going to run it back to the 14th so that we can see the solar eclipse coming through. Now, if you're a Libra rising, the solar eclipse is falling in your 3rd house, a place that's associated with your immediate environment, the things that closely surround you. Like, for example, if the 4th is your home, then it's things that are close to home, neighbors, siblings. I've often found that, action in the 3rd house will mean that there's a lot of change happening in the world around you, which could include the places that are most familiar to you. Changes happening in your neighborhood, a sister's getting married, a brother's having a baby, even the aunts and uncles and stuff like that. So maybe some action in the periphery around your home and family that's changing. Sometimes it has to do with transit or communication or technology. I'm getting a new computer. I'm I'm establishing a new office space, or yeah, even like I've said this one before, but maybe I'm going to bike to work rather than drive my car. So something, but it's about the way that we navigate the everyday world or environment, including potential technological changes. It also has to do sometimes with learning or teaching or writing or communicating, some new form or style emerging in any of those areas. So those are things to watch for there. It's also about a change of mind or a change of how you speak or present yourself. For Libra rising, tend to be more on the side of balance, err more on the side of that caution that is presented by the exaltation of Saturn in Libra. So there's a cautious and careful, very balanced, sort of symmetrical energy to Librans. You have a solar eclipse in Sagittarius in the third house. It's likely that you might become more outspoken about something, or a little bit more, um, willing to take a risk in terms of speaking and communicating things that you feel very passionately about. All right, so let's move forward now to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on the 21st. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on the 21st, if you're a Libra rising, is happening in a fantastic place, the fifth house of good fortune. I love this in terms of like, it's first of all, how do you, a new chapter with Jupiter Saturn? Usually we think of life direction, purpose. We think about, business and the stuff that we're doing that's usually connected to like vocation or work in the world. And Jupiter Saturn really fits in nicely with like the 10th house and stuff like that. But the fifth house can point to starting to prioritize joy, romance, beauty, happiness in a way that maybe you haven't before. I think Librans are pretty happy people overall, being a child of Venus. But one thing that Librans may struggle with is a little bit of indecision in being good at harmonizing. It's sometimes not as easy to figure out what makes me happy on a personal level. So you see a fifth house transit like this, and you think, okay, maybe this person is going, maybe the Libra rising people out there are going to get just clearer and more committed somehow to the path that will really make them happy, to saying, okay, these are my ideals, very Aquarian thing. These are my ideals. This is these are my philosophical commitments. And somehow by becoming clearer about them, we can become more joyful people. Sometimes that means limiting or narrowing our field of activities or involvement to just those things that bring us greater joy or happiness, or that are more creatively fulfilling or rewarding. So you could see this as the beginning of a new creative era in your life if you're a creative type. Sometimes, of course, this is a great transit for getting pregnant, just in terms of a new era in your life that comes with the news that you're pregnant or having a child, or a new era in your life also with Jupiter and Saturn that might come by saying, I'm having a procedure done to make sure I can't have kids anymore. So, any kind of new era in your life that it represents a big decision, a big change. It's going to last a long time, have a long-term effect on your life, and is somehow related to children or kids. I'm going to send them to this school. We're moving to this school district. I don't know. Things like that would be possible as well. Probably the other thing that comes to my mind here is, again, how many times have I seen Saturn enter the fifth and a person decides to curb their spending, stop the gambling, go to AA, get sober. Jupiter Saturn in the fifth can also be about people who have hedonistic tendencies suddenly becoming more mature and balanced in their expression of desire energy. Give me this, I want to consume that. Jupiter Saturn comes in and says, let's get on a new workout routine and limit our calories. And it lasts a long time. It's a great time to have some kind of healthy reform in terms of your relationship with pleasure. So last but not least, on the 23rd, we have the square between Mars and Pluto. So Mars and Pluto square one another, and this is between the 7th house of marriage and the 4th house of home and family. Now, you've had that Mars in your 7th house since late June if you're a Libra rising. So there may be some challenges around relationships or partnerships. I've seen a lot of people in my practice over the past several months with Mars retrograde in the 7th going through relationship challenges. But they're coming to a head now. Whatever you've been working on since June, the final catharsis is here, and you'll feel it around the 23rd, especially. That's a catharsis tying together, the theme of Mars: conflict, hostility, aggression, but also independence, individuality within the context of intimate relationships. And it's tying back into Hades, Pluto, this lord of the underworld, death and rebirth in the house of home, family, roots, etc. So watch for those energies to come together around the 23rd. All right, so let's go forward to Scorpio rising. I'm going to put Scorpio on the ascendant, and we're going to walk this back to the 14th. And we're going to take a look at the new moon solar eclipse in your second house. So this house is associated with resources, income, and expenditures. If you were in the ancient world, and you had an attorney, they would be your second house. If you had a second in a duel, it would be your second house. The people who are close personal advisors or counselors that are somehow act as an aid or helper would be the second house. Also, people who are somehow connected to us through business and money, finances, deals we're trying to make, things we're trying to sell or buy, changes in business, launching a business. So all of those kinds of second house themes are on the table for you this month. A solar eclipse in this house with the south node could mean, for example, I'm going to take a new position. It makes me happier, but it makes a little bit less money. South node could diminish something or represent letting go of something, but it's being done in order to start a new chapter in life overall, which I think will be overall positive for you. Now, if we go forward to the 21st of the month, so watch for all matter of changes coming over the next 6 months around money, finances, resources, things like that. At the same time, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction comes in on the 21st in your fourth house. So the new era that we've been talking about is now happening around roots, home, family, property. Again, it's very textbook, but Jupiter or Saturn moving into the house, often into the fourth, often coincide with death or births in the family, moving houses or buying property. Sometimes parents or grandparents passing away. It's like a big turnover that's happening around your roots. That is, again, Scorpios have, to me, maybe the most clear cut of the transits of the month, except for the Mars Pluto, which I'll talk about in a second. But money, finances, big changes, and then also home, family. That's where the focus of energy is if you're a Scorpio. Now, but the last transit of Mars Pluto is a little bit trickier. So Mars is in your sixth, and this is your ruling planet, remember, and Pluto's in your third. Now, the sixth house, remember, is a place that Mars loves. The Mars rejoices in the sixth house. This is called the joy of Mars. When you're talking about Pluto in the third and Mars in the sixth, you're often talking about a certain level of chaos or difficulty or hard work or labor that is somehow happening in the environment around you. I want to give you a picture of this. So when I was living in New York City, and I was living in Harlem, and literally outside of my window from my apartment, like maybe, I don't know, a couple hundred yards behind my apartment building, I could see it. There was a lot that was being demoed, and it was, they had this, it must have been the size of a crane, and it was dropping this huge weight and like smashing old concrete on the ground, and it would do it like all day long from like 8 a.m. to like 4 or 5 p.m. It would just, and it was like rhythmic, and it was like ba-jing, ba-jing, like that. And that, like, oh my God. And of course, I had, at that point in time, I had sixth house transits going on that were connecting to transits in the third. So I never forgot that, just in terms of there being this kind of chaos around me in my environment that I was contending with. Another example, the sixth to the third that I had, was one time we redid the bathrooms and the kitchen in our house, and they were all being done simultaneously, and we were living out of a mini fridge, and the house was just complete chaos. So that I don't mean to be like, oh yeah, have fun, Scorpios, you're going to have this sucky month, but it's just a weird way in which the chaos around you is just, it's like, I can't get my center. And I'm trying to this month, if you're Scorpio rising, because you got this Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the base of your chart. Like, here's this new era starting in my life. I'm trying to buy a new house or move into a new place or whatever. But it could be that as you're doing that, you end up breaking a toe, and having to go to the ER, or just as you're doing that, one of your sisters or brothers or something like that has a big crisis going on in their life. I just ran into some of this with Mars in my 12th house, not very different. Everyone in my family kind of going totally bonkers. What was Mars doing? Mars is in the 12th, squaring my sun in the third. So, again, anytime the third house is involved and you get Mars or a difficult planet squaring from the 6th or the 12th, it's as though it's just like you've got to manage or deal with these different crazy circumstantial factors around you coming in and potentially thwarting what you're trying to do. Now, on the other hand, this can also speak to being really mentally quite passionate and intense right now. Mars in the 6th is like Muhammad Ali. I mean, he had the sun in the 6th, but in Capricorn, the exaltation of Mars, and the fighter in you could be coming out. Now, when it hits Pluto in the 3rd, watch out for just suddenly, you're out to coffee with a friend and they bring up something that you've been feeling pent up about for a while, and suddenly you take off your mask and throw your latte in their face. And I mean, I don't know, but you have to be really careful. Don't stab someone, you know what I mean? So on the other hand, don't be surprised if something sort of bursts, if there's a burst or a release of energy, which could be very positive and constructive, especially if you've been working on something, feeling a little pent up or blocked, and then suddenly there's this big release of energy. That's very Mars Pluto. All right, so that kind of rounds it out for you if you're a Scorpio rising this month. Now let's do this again for Sagittarians. So we're going to put Sag on the ascendant, and we're going to go back. Lucky you, Sag, you have an eclipse in your home sign. People are always really freaked out about getting eclipses in their rising sign, but it's not the world's worst thing. The lunar eclipses are usually a little bit more difficult than the solar eclipses because the lunar eclipses tend to point to endings. Solar eclipses to beginnings. Beginnings in your 1st house, the place where planets rise, an inceptional place already, is pretty good. You're looking at some very personal new beginning that's happening in your life. You can track these back 9 years, 18 years. They go in cycles, right? The eclipses do. A new beginning in your 1st house usually will coincide with starting something new or changing something fundamental about yourself or your sense of purpose and direction in life. It can come up that, the health problems can come up with eclipses in the 1st house. Can be a little bit rough on your health, but it's usually that the health problems are coming up as a way of guiding you toward a new version of yourself. And if you get the message, it can be, these just can be the greatest things in the world because they're very, what's that? The phrase that they use in politics where a certain county has always been the county that bellwether. What is that phrase? The county that always shows the way that the whole country is trending based on how they vote. You know that phrase? I don't know what it's called, but that's how solar eclipses are in the 1st house. It's like whatever's coming up for you around solar eclipses in your 1st house, that's telling you how things are going to keep going down the line if you keep going the way you've been going. And so there are these really nice indicators, very clear omens of what needs to change. And oftentimes I notice over my practice, people have no problem picking up on this stuff if you're even a little self-reflective. So if there are difficulties coming up, they're there for you, not against you. All right, so that's my Sagittarius. We're gonna eclipse in your home sign. Let's take this forward to the 21st, where we're gonna see the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. This is landing in your 3rd house, a place that is associated with the mind. So Jupiter, Saturn in this house conjoining will probably coincide with things that you are taking a great interest in on the level of your mind, of learning, teaching, communicating, writing, anything involving media or technology. We're not talking about a small little change like, oh, I get a new tablet. We're talking about something that is going to change the way that you interact with the world on the level of your mind and intellect. If there's technological changes coming, it's going to be changes that deeply impact the trajectory of your life for the next 20 years. Also things that can happen involving siblings or something around you, something changing in your neighborhood, something changing in the country that you live in terms of the sort of local strata of life. You can also see this in terms of there being, like people will often build their website or they'll find a way of bringing their ideas or their voice into the world in some really substantive way. I've got a new website, I've got a blog, I'm starting a YouTube channel, something like that. But also just a renaissance in terms of a rebirth or a reawakening in terms of your mind and your intellect. I'm believing differently. The paradigm for me mentally is changing. I'm starting to, people get involved in politics for the first time, or they may join some kind of organization for the first time, and they become absorbed in something that gives them a sense of purpose, that they're clarifying your ideals and how they're going to shape your everyday life. That would all make sense for this transit. Okay, if you go forward to the 23rd, we've got Mars in Aries square Pluto from the 5th to the 2nd. Some of this we've said with other signs. This, first of all, this can have a big bearing on finances and on money and resources. I like this as a very good, like a moment of breakthrough around money, finances, etc. I've seen, for example, women decide, I'm not going to go back to work. I'm going to take an extended maternity leave, or I'm going to, I'm going to leave my job and just be a part-time. I'm going to go to a part-time job, or I'm going to become a full-time mom or something like that. Or I'm going to go back to work after a maternity leave. It could be something that simple. My sister, for example, has this transit, and she'll be making choices about her maternity schedule for sure. So, it fits with her, and I've seen that a lot over the years, because Pluto's obviously been in a Capricorn for a long time. So this transit I've seen before. It can also pertain to, again, the more reckless side. I'm going to overspend money. I'm going to overdrink or overconsume, and I don't care what anyone thinks. And then suddenly it can have a big impact on you. You spend too much, you go into credit card debt. So you definitely want to be careful about the darker side of desire and consumption under this combination with the 2nd and the 5th. But also a breakthrough around money or finances. Remember, the 5th house is called good fortune. And sometimes we always want the 5th house to be about creativity, which it is, but it also just has to do with random good things that happen to you. That's a part of the 5th house traditionally. So if Mars square Pluto sounds a little bit rough, the upside is that there could be some significant breakthrough here that leads to, a windfall of some kind. This is also, for a lot of people, this is the transit where you realize you're pregnant and you go, holy shit, I excuse my language, I wasn't ready for this. How am I going to handle this financially? I'm going to have to make really deep, big I'm going to put on my adult pants and make really big decisions. Kind of feels very life or death. Those kinds of things come up frequently when you see planets in the 5th squaring Pluto in the 2nd. So some different things to watch for. All right, so that's if you're a Sagittarius rising. Let's do it over again for Capricorn rising. Let's put Capricorn on the ascendant, and let's go back to the 14th. All right, so if you are a Capricorn rising, we're talking about the new moon eclipse on the 14th in your 12th house. Now, again, along with Cancers, you get your eclipse in a difficult house this month. What does that mean? Well, let me tell you the story of a client that I have who's a Capricorn rising who started getting the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius in the 12th last June. So as soon as they got the lunar eclipse in the 12th house, now notice this connection, by the way, this is kind of interesting, but the moon and sun conjoining, right? In an eclipse, you always pay attention to the moon and its rulership in the chart. This is the 7th house, Cancer in this case. But this person ended up having their in-laws having to come and live with them, basically, in their house. And one of the unfortunate things about this is that they don't have in-laws that they love, right? So I shouldn't say that they love, that they get along with so well. And so for them, the lunar eclipse there signaled this very difficult turning point with spouse and the lunar eclipse in June, right? With spouse, notice that Cancer rules the 7th in this case, and spouse's parents coming to live with them and becoming this thorn in his side. Well, that's the 12th house. There's a difficult thing that comes into your environment that is potentially going to try to pull you off course. It's a distraction. It's something you do to yourself. It's self-destructive in some way, or it's out of your control, but it comes in and it just makes you feel like you're dealing with a tempestuous energy. You have to go through it. The 12th house is associated with women in labor. Before the child is born, they have to labor with something. There's this feeling of being in an in-between world where you're having to deal with circumstances that are coming up. The thing to remember that helps us weather the storm of 12th house transits is knowing that this too shall pass. This does not last forever. Even impermanence and spaces where we can't get grounded, they don't last forever. Just as much as things that we think are going to last forever that are very grounding or make us feel very secure don't last forever, so too the bad stuff doesn't last forever. If we remember that and then also treat every misfortune or difficult circumstance that comes up as though it's like a visiting angel, it has something to offer us. It has something to give us. If we can try to keep that perspective, the 12th house is, it's like Gandalf who said, all who wander are not lost. Everything that comes up in the 12th house makes us feel like we're getting pulled off course or unexpected things are coming up and we're just sort of being tossed around by them. But if we see them as messages from our soul, as messages from the divine, and we trust that this too shall pass, these become places where we grow majorly. We become much more mature, much more patient, much more curious and less, what do you want to say, certain. The curse of certainty can be a real problem. The curse of certainty can be taken away with eclipses in the 12th, which is a nice thing. It really is. It's nice to be free of the burden of certainty in life. Because when we live with a respect for uncertainty, it's harder for anything to really steal our happiness. Because if our happiness is rooted in a whole bunch of false confidence and stuff like that, then we're actually we're a lot weaker than we appear. Anyway, so that's supposed to be encouraging for you Capricorns who have the eclipse in the 12th. Now, let's see. For example, my father also has Capricorn rising. He's got the eclipse in the 12th. Him and his girlfriend just broke up. He's moving into a new place. He's a little bit in between. He's a little out of sorts. He's trying to figure, himself out again, etc. It's very 12th house like. All right, let's go to the 21st. On the 21st of December, you get a new era in your financial house. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in your second, I like this. Maybe of all the placements for Jupiter-Saturn, I feel like this is one of the best because you're talking about the potential for a very, very positive long-term development happening financially. There's a turning point that happens here. If you've been down and out, maybe something new is getting started for you. You have to work really hard. That's part of Saturn in the second, but Jupiter is there providing the rain, to get the project going, the abundance that we need for things to be successful. Jupiter Saturn in the second can also point to, what do I want to call it? Jupiter Saturn in the second is like, sometimes it'll coincide with launching a company or getting a new job or a new position or a new title or something like that. But it usually has this feeling behind it of like increased responsibilities. I've read so many charts with Jupiter and Saturn conjoined in Libra in the, early like 1981, right around there. And when you see that combination in the second house, it's weird how people end up taking up this mantle of greater responsibility. Maybe they end up being the successor to a family business, or maybe they start their own endeavor or enterprise, or there's just this theme of needing to be really self-reliant and innovative with regard to one's own personal finances. So great for Capricorns because this is your ruling planet, Saturn, and it's still in its own rulership, a good sign. So hard work that pays off, improvement around money and finances, increased responsibility around money and finances. Those are some of the good things. You might be contending a little bit with the Uranian impulse to sort of defy, to be more reckless, to be more creatively free or unprohibited. So the conservative and more eclectic, erratic energies between Saturn and Uranus will be battling a bit for you in the year ahead, but I think it goes well overall. Okay. For example, people could also start new investment strategies under this transit. That would not be surprising at all to me for Capricorns to do that. But the question about whether to go more conservative or more eclectic. Do I do a standard portfolio, or do I, invest in Bitcoin or something like that? Not that, I mean, probably a lot of us aren't dealing with having the kind of money necessary to buy a Bitcoin. I think they're like $10,000 or 15 or something crazy like that. But anyway, okay. So last but not least, we're going to take a look at the Mars-Pluto energy. Now, this is forming between the first and the fourth, home, family, property, and the first house. This is not the time to, become one of those get off my lawn, people, because the potential for there to be conflict around, home, family, property with an aura of violence or conflict or hostility is there for you this month. So you do want to be cautious about those energies. Sometimes it's going to also translate into just dealing with anger and coming to terms with anger or frustration. And Capricorn is the sign that exalts Mars. So Capricorns are Saturn ruled, but the Capricorn energy is also very martial. With Pluto and Mars squaring from your first to fourth, there's just a theme this month around coming to terms with or coming to meet this foundational level of Mars energy in your life. How does it exist in your home? How does it exist in your family? How does anger, frustration, conflict, will, power, authority, how do those things, are you dealing with those realities in a healthy way in your life? Those are deep psychological questions this month for Capricorns, in my opinion. All right, let's take it forward again. We're going to put Aquarius on the ascendant. We're almost coming down to the end. All you Pisces who've been patiently waiting, if you've been watching this whole thing. So let's run it back to the 14th. And then here we go. So on the 14th of the month, the new moon eclipse in Sagittarius is happening in your 11th house. That's the place of friends, groups, communities, allies, wishes and hopes for the future. I love this eclipse for Aquarians. It's a really nice one in terms of, new groups of people, new communities, new friends coming into your life. Maybe not right away. Sometimes it takes a few months to sort of play out. But it also could be that the people coming into your life are going to be of a more spiritual nature. South Node. You have the South Node as the signature of otherworldliness. North Node in Indian astrology, a little bit more associated with worldly ambitions. An otherworldly set of friends. You don't want to hang out with, a group of friends who are otherworldly in the sense of, say, doing drugs or trying to, escape reality in some unhealthy manner. But the idea that new people are coming into your life, new allies are coming into your life, and that these people are going to benefit you greatly is really powerful this month, because the ruler of this eclipse, Jupiter, is about to change signs. And where is that heading? If you're in Aquarius, you've got the energy of the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in your first house. So that solar eclipse in the 11th, friends, groups, communities, etc., allies, ruled by Jupiter. And then what does Jupiter do? Days later, changes signs, conjoins with your ruling planet Saturn in your first sign, in your whole sign first house. So another really auspicious Jupiter-Saturn combination this month, if you're in Aquarius. This is a very powerful thing that's happening in your chart. Jupiter-Saturn, the beginning of an era, it lasts 20 years. And for you, it's in the most personal house of the whole chart. So that means that this new era that's coming in is going to shape, usually you'll see inceptional things happening in the first house. You're starting something new. It's not just any old thing. It's going to last a long time with Jupiter and Saturn. It's not just any old thing. It's something that comes down to, who am I? What do I feel? My gifts, my talents, my sense of life direction, and the need to double down on the things that you really care about. My ideals, very important for Aquarians. What are my ideals and how am I living them or enacting them in the world? During this time, Saturn in the first can be a little bit of a burden. The feeling of, do I fit in? Where do I fit in? How do I fit in or not? The feeling of being, alien or outsider or different somehow, and the pain that's created, the pain that comes with that. But also Jupiter in the first house will capitalize on that somehow. It'll say, it's okay that you're different. Now, what are you going to do about it? Or how do you lead your life based on the fact that you're realizing that you're different? Those are good problems to have, I think. So, because Jupiter will give you this sense of confidence that there's something new to be concerned with here. And it's going to relate back, in your case, right? Relating back to the changes the solar eclipse implies in the house of friends and groups and community and things like that. So I think I'd love to hear stories from Aquarians this month of December and into January to hear how that's affecting you. Or if you are already seeing that at work, I'd love to hear you guys tell your stories. Okay, so let's go forward just a little bit more to around the 23rd. And that's when we get Mars in the 3rd square to Pluto in the 12th. Now, it's not without controversy, these changes that you're making, because we've got Mars in the 3rd house squaring Pluto in the 12th. I would say there is a possibility of making changes out of the desire to be provocative. So watch for that kind of rebel without a cause. If you have a cause, being provocative might be good, and you might see this as a transit that empowers you to speak speak truth to power, as they say, or to make a change or to address something that needs to be addressed. And maybe there's a certain degree of courage and assertiveness that you need, that you find this month, especially here around the 23rd. But if you're trying to make a change and you're just trying to will it or ram it through, and there's this kind of reckless, defiant quality behind it, this could be very damaging to you, and you could create for yourself a lot of problems. So I feel like there's a kind of a test for Aquarius rising, at the beginning of this, at the beginning of this new era in your life. How are you starting that era? The way that we start things matters. It tones and shapes. It's like the way you plant a seed, the time of year you plant it at. That kind of stuff really matters. So with Mars Pluto here, there's a cathartic energy. It's more mentally intense, could be a little self-destructive. You could be dealing with challenges in the environment around you. Again, that 3rd house quality of things that just kind of come up and go like, oh my God, I'm competing with all of these, for the forces of strife, Mars in the 3rd or Pluto in the 12th. But are they undermining you, or are they enlightening you? And are you undermining yourself? And be very aware of like petty conflicts with people this month if you're an Aquarius, because they can really steal something that's special for you this month. All right. So that's what I've got for Aquarians. Last but not least, we have Pisces. So we're going to put Pisces on the ascendant and we'll roll it back to the 14th. All righty. So here we're taking, again, angular houses for the eclipses. If you're a mutable sign, very powerful. So the solar eclipse is in your 10th house of career. You're thinking about a new beginning relative to the place of career. You're thinking about, usually there's like, new jobs, new bosses, new organizations, new skills, new, promotion, things like that, changing jobs, changing titles, changing your sense of purpose, direction professionally. Those are the kinds of things that generally happen here. Turnover in the workplace, the kind of death and rebirth theme with eclipses in general in the workplace. So those are things to watch for this month. Now, one of the things that I find really interesting here, if you're a Pisces, is that you have maybe one of the most interesting Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, because what we're doing on the 21st here is we're seeing Saturn and Jupiter combine in the 12th house. Now remember, Jupiter's the ruler of that eclipse in the 10th. What does that mean? Okay, well, the way that I would look at this is that there's two basic interpretations that I would make. One is going to be that the change that you're seeing in the workplace, eclipse in the 10th, let me just highlight this. So you've got the eclipse in the 10th up here, and then it's followed by its ruler Jupiter conjoining with Saturn in the 12th. So that would either mean that the changes at work are happening due to some kind of turbulence or chaos or difficult weather, basically, that is going to create the change. So, for example, let's say that you work at a company and there's going to be changes in the management, or the company is being bought out by someone else. And it's the beginning. You're going to retain your job, but it's the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of the end because the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the 12th house is now signifying a new era in your life that is going to come through the gradual erosion of the workplace that you've been in for a while. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to take it's going to be kind of a long, slow burn where the landscape of your career is totally changing. It's kind of falling apart, very 12th house like. But the good news is that this will be leading to a very auspicious new chapter that you can't see coming yet. And that's how I would generally interpret this combination. That's part one. Now, part two would be that the change at work that's happening is going to suddenly take on a 12th house dimension or characteristic or quality. Working with people who are suffering, working with people who are ill, working with people who are homeless or outcast or alienated, doing something charitable, working with people who are lost, anything 12th house like, working somehow off the grid. These are all like 12th house themes. Working in hospitals or prisons or places where people go when they are falling apart. Something about the change in work will take you out or away from the world in some way into a more liminal space. The 12th house was called Metacosmios, a place between worlds, and the 12th house was called the joy of Saturn, a planet that tends to be very distant from the world. It's the dimmest, most distant planet. So it's also a possibility that something new is happening in your work or career, but it's going to be very 12th house oriented. I'm going to start working I'm going to start serving people in a clinic somewhere or a shelter somewhere or something like that. Maybe there's something very humanitarian that's going to start happening. So it's either that the changes in work start taking on this really epic 12th house dimension, which will last for a very long time, or it's at the beginning of the end of something in your career is happening due to a level of change that's happening in your industry or the organization or the ideal or mission is changing somehow, and it's going to lead you to gradually part ways and begin a totally new chapter in your professional life. Those would be my most confident interpretations that are also very general. Last but not least, we have the Mars-Pluto dynamic. And the Mars-Pluto dynamic is happening across your 2nd and 11th. So you're talking about money, resources, a certain extent business and finance, income and expenditures. And it's hitting Pluto in the 11th house of groups, friends, organizations, etc. There's a few different things that tend to come up between these two houses. One is going to be that you see the changes happening in larger industries or organizations impact your money or your finances somehow. You're also going to see investments being made by people who have money to invest because something is changing in the world. Oh my gosh, everyone's bullish about Bitcoin, so I'm going to invest in that. But the idea here is some kind of catharsis is being reached around money and finances for you. This is something that's been going on since late June when Mars entered Aries. You went through the retrograde in your 2nd house of money. Now Mars is going to hit Pluto, this lord of kind of death and rebirth. Is a powerful cathartic moment around money and resources one way or another, probably tied into long-term goals or dreams or ambitions, different changes happening within groups or industries in a larger, broader sense. So watch for that around the 23rd. All right, that takes us through all 12 signs. I am very happy to have gone through all this with you today. I thought it would be fun. Before I take questions, I want to remind everybody that my Kickstarter, we have until New Year's. Let me just put up the link. We have until New Year's Eve at midnight. If you enjoy my work, if you enjoy these live casts, if you enjoy the different series that I make, please consider supporting my work. I put the link into the live stream chat box right there for you. We are trying to get to 691 backers to break last year's record. We're closing in on 300 today. So we're almost halfway there already in a week, which is like record pace. It's awesome. Thank you guys for the support. Remember that when you donate, you can also pick up my 1st year, 2nd year, or horary online courses for half off the normal price, $400 off the early bird price. So it's a really good deal. It's the best time of year. Only do it this time of year. And there's other gifts and rewards you can choose when you do it as well. So thank you guys so much for your support. I'll open up for a little Q&A if anybody has them right now. And I think we're going on about 2 hours, which I hoped we'd be in under. So yeah, let's see what questions you guys have. Let's see. How would you see the birth of twins in a birth chart? I'm currently pregnant and I have a hunch. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Do you have a Gemini in the 5th house, or Gemini in the 1st house, the sign of the twins? That might be one thing to look at. I've never seen like a really, really easy, obvious indicator of gender or number of kids. I can see usually in a chart when pregnancy periods are going to happen, but it's a lot harder to sit back and go like, yeah, this many, this gender, whatever, this sex, whatever. Right. What would be the best way to track eclipses through your life? I'm trying to look at the correlation to some major events. Look at them by whole sign house, right? So, for example, you have eclipses happening right now in Gemini and Sag. What whole sign houses are those falling into in your chart? Track it back 9 years, track it back 18 years. Watch the patterns of different types of events that happen around those times. Watch how the karma has changed or evolved. Do that for all of the signs. You can use a program like, I think online free one would be like AstroSeek or Astro.com. I use SolarFire, but there's a lot that you can track it with. And then just kind of noticing how the karma has changed. Then you can reflect, what have the lessons been? What have I gotten right? And maybe, where do I still need to improve? Those can be useful. Let's see here. Sag rising with eclipse conjunct the ascendant, going into 6th house year with Uranus sitting there. Sign to be extra cautious of health stuff? Yes. Yeah. Sag rising, if you have an eclipse on the ascendant, like on the degree of your ascendant in Sagittarius, you're going to want to be a little extra careful with eclipses. It's not like you're doomed or anything, but you do want to be a little careful about that. Advice for the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the 12th, trying to read and meditate instead of falling into old maladaptive coping mechanisms, but golly. Yeah, thank you for that question. That came from Keiko Daimon. Yeah, I mean, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the 12th to me would be another one of those signs of someone saying, I'm going to give my life to Jesus. I'm going to join AA. I'm going like anything that would serve as a reformative decision. I'm going to reform my life. That would be the most auspicious level of dealing with the potential self-destructiveness of the 12th. Jupiter Saturn, I'm turning over a new leaf. I think that's the expression. Yeah. So that would be, and the other thing is, of course, Jupiter Saturn in the 12th is also going to be a sign of potentially being taken in by something like the technocracy. You know what I mean? Like I think of Jupiter and Saturn in the 12th. And I also think of like the way that technology wants to assert dominance in our lives and kind of that Brave New World, everyone's going to have a chip in their arm soon, it's like, and potentially kind of drinking the Kool-Aid of some progressive or technological ideal that maybe actually takes you out of yourself somehow. So I would be careful about idealism or sort of fanaticism taking over someone in the 12th house with Jupiter and Saturn there. But otherwise, I think it's good also for gaining some really deep perspective about one's own, demons or problems and turning over, just starting to heal thyself. That's a good place for Jupiter and Saturn to be for healing thyself. Yeah, use tropical whole sign houses. Yeah, good question. Thank you. What if a person with a Pisces rising is already in an institution? Well, it could be that if they've been there for a long time or a short time or what, it could be a sign that, that there is, maybe they're about to go home, or maybe there's it's a new beginning in life relative to what they've been dealing with. So do they get a new doctor? Do they get a new therapist? Or do they move to a new institution? Or are they coming home from one? All of those would be fitting. You're just thinking about a new era happening within the subject matter of that 12th house. It's very general. So it's hard to be super specific without seeing the all of the details of a birth chart. I heard that transits only affect you. This comes from, can't read your name. Sorry, can't pronounce it. I heard that transits only affect you if you're going out and about actively doing things in the world, but eclipses affect you even if you aren't doing anything. What do you think about this? They're not, they're just signs and omens. So they're all affecting you, some more than others due to the context of the natal chart. That's how I would look at it. And it's not really if you're doing something or not doing something. It's not like it's not like literal weather. They're symbols. They're like tarot cards, So do the tarot cards cause something to happen? No, they're signs of things that are happening. So the signs affect us differently, not typically because you're out in the world or not, like it's raining or not, or something like that. It's just like, the tarot cards affect you, regardless of what the weather in the card looks like or something like that too. It's hard to explain, but they're just their omens and their signs. I know some people are very superstitious about looking at eclipses, and I'll say that I can understand that one. There's a lot more superstition around looking at eclipses, but hi, I'm a Libra rising and things in my life have been stagnant for a while now. Will things start to ease up so I can start moving forward with projects, etc.? Yeah, because if you're a Libra rising, then the good news about this for you is that you're going to have that you're going to have the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in your 5th house. And that's a place that would suggest, being able to get some momentum going creatively. So I really like that for you. What is the degree amount, Lana asks, degree amount around an Antisha in your birth chart, i.e. the sun in Cancer, 9th house, 11 degrees, and Mercury, 8th house, 21 degrees. Does that count? Well, I like it to be within about a degree, and I like it on the perfecting, not separating side. So, in that case, I would probably say no. It's a little far off for me, but I'd have to look at the chart because there could be other factors that make me think, okay, maybe there's other corroborating evidence in the chart that there's connections to be made between those placements, in which case it doesn't have to be as tight. But that's a very specific thing that I can't really tell for myself unless I'm seeing a chart. Eclipse happening, Betty says, eclipse happening on my natal moon at 20 degrees Sagittarius, 3rd house Libra rising. What is the significance here? Thank you. Yeah, well, first of all, let's just let me just bring it up so I can look at it while I'm your natal moon in the 3rd. Well, first of all, think about mother and siblings, mother, sisters, women in your life, and the potential for there to be some degree of change happening in the immediate environment around you, like neighborhood or house, or that 3rd house is so peripheral. It has so much to do with the things that are happening in a very immediate space around us. If you have your moon in the 3rd house, that's going to mean potentially your career house ruler, if you're a Libra rising, in Sag in the 3rd, could hit your career, or things happening in the career, the workplace, the work environment can be tied in there. But also I would think about mothers, women, children, pregnancy, all lunar stuff that could be pronounced somehow. Like there's so many different ways, but like, anytime the moon gets eclipsed, it's like, is someone pregnant? Is a mother or daughter a part of the storyline right now, or a sister in the 3rd house? So those are some of the key things that I would look at. You have to be careful of the moon with health a little bit too, like your own health. So, yeah. Okay. What if the eclipse affects the 7th and the native is a widower? How is that an effect on the partner? Well, again, it doesn't always have to do with relationships or partners that are already existing. Someone new could be entering the life. Otherwise, sometimes it's going to be a picture of something other that someone is getting involved with. For example, I can't tell you how many times that a person will find a mentor or a teacher or a spiritual path when Jupiter enters the 7th, or when eclipses happen in the 7th, that important things that transcend the meanness of life come in and somehow pull us into someone or something bigger than ourselves. And so that doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. And the ancient astrologers were really clear about this. The 7th house is called Deusis, which means, it has the meaning of immersing ourselves in something, like someone diving below the surface of water and disappearing, or like penetration and sex, where the man disappears into the woman, so to speak. And that as a is symbolic of a planet dropping below the horizon and disappearing out of sight. And when that happens, the idea is that we are merging or joining with something other. And that's why there's a sexual connotation, but it can be the gods. It can be, a guru. It could be anything that comes and has this sort of transcendent effect on our life. So there could be something new coming into somebody's life. In other words, it has almost like a transcendental, it absorbs them in something. And it's hard to say what that is. It's different in every person, for every person. I've seen people get really absorbed in new topics or subjects or astrology, like Uranus enters the 7th and suddenly someone gets really interested in astrology. Not uncommon at all. Let's see. Solar eclipse. Oh, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I'm going to have to skip over. I can't answer all of these. Thank you guys so much for your questions. Nancy says, Namaste, Scorpio sun, Pisces rising, Jupiter and Aries on top of the ascendant. I've had extreme physical pain since March, ending around November 3rd. Much less pain now. What's up? Let's see. Hold on. I got a Pisces rising. Let me just put your ascendant. I can't see it unless I put it on my chart. So, okay. So you've had Jupiter in Aries on top of ascendant. Well, if you're a Pisces rising, your ascendant is going to be Pisces, right? If you're an Aries rising, then your rising is going to be Aries. You might be using a different house system. In ancient astrology, we use whole sign houses. So if you're an Aries rising with Jupiter on your ascendant in Aries, right, then it's hard to say exactly what would be causing it. But one thing that could be happening would be, hold on, let me just make sure I've got your yeah, it's hard to say, like if you've got Jupiter and Aries on the ascendant. Let me see here, let me just take a, you might have, I mean, there could be like, you've had Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter squaring from Capricorn to a first house planet. Those can cause physical pains. That would be a real possibility. And then you've had Mars retrograde in Aries, which would be, if that's your ascendant, then that would be another difficult factor. Probably you'll experience a little bit of a lift when Jupiter and Saturn get out of Capricorn and get out of the square to that natal Jupiter in Aries on the ascendant, if that's what you've been dealing with. So yeah. Again, I'm just kind of shooting in the dark here without your full chart, but is there any significance of the solar eclipse happening near or on the north node? Well, a solar eclipse happening on the north node when it's a south node eclipse would mean that you're in the midst of a flipped lunar return or a flipped nodal return. So you're going to look really carefully at the topics of the houses that the nodes are in your birth chart by whole sign. And then imagine that I like to think of it as like a cross-examination happening between those two areas of your life when the nodes return and are flipped. Certain ways that we value one topic over the other, or one topic in comparison to the other, can sometimes get turned on their head during that time. So that's how I would look at it. And I would look at it also as a sign that you may not be interested in something any longer. South node eclipsing the north node is often a sign of the end of some kind of ambition or former pursuit. We've reaped what we've sown, and now it's time to put it away. So there'll be someone or something new entering because we've lost interest in some previous ambition. So that's one way. But again, take the houses, look at the houses of the nodes in your chart for sure. Let's see, I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. I have, by the way, in my Kickstarter this year, there is a several part series that I'm making available only through the Kickstarter on the nodes of the moon in ancient astrology, which includes how they were read, the philosophy behind them, as well as a bunch of chart demonstrations and some practical instructions for interpreting them. That's one of the rewards that I'm offering through the Kickstarter. For some of you guys, that might be a good one if you feel like pitching in. Okay. Pisces rising here, really concerned about the cathartic moment in resources that you said was coming on the 23rd. I have been working on breaking into markets and investing. Well, I would not make, I would not put all of your eggs into one basket, because that, what can we say? The Mars square Pluto between the 2nd and the 11th can be sort of like sort of like if you're weightlifting and you just try to go a weight too heavy and then you end up dropping it on your foot or something. So you want to be careful that you're not doing things that are like Herculean and massive risks, and because that could end badly with this one. But I would think calculated risks, carefully thought out, risks, investments, things like that, could pay off. So I would be optimistic, but not rash. That would be my advice there. Great conjunction on lot of fortune in the 9th. How could that manifest? Gemini rising. Wow. Well, I really like that for you. M Champagne. I think that probably speaks to meeting a teacher. I think that probably speaks to your spiritual life developing. It's a destined event happening for you around the topic of beliefs, learning, education, travel, foreign places. So it's something big. I mean, when I had Jupiter conjoin my lot of fortune, it was a very significant moment in my life. So don't underestimate the slower moving planets passing over the lot of fortune. I mean, it's a good place to have the lot, and it's a good place to have the conjunction on the lot. So I would think you're in for something really special around 9th house topics. Depends on where Saturn is in your chart, by the way. Make sure you take that into consideration. What if a sign is intercepted in the 1st house, Aquarius rising, but Pisces intercepted? Well, if a sign is intercepted in the 1st house, it means you're not using the right house system. I use whole sign houses, so I don't have that problem. My advice would be to use whole sign houses, but it's hard. It's hard to just make the switch to whole sign houses without also studying ancient astrology, which makes sense of why you're using whole sign houses in this really profound way. I personally am like, I'm one of the main reasons I don't use quadrant based houses is because I've never read a coherent, clear, easily understandable explanation for why signs should be intercepted. I just never have come across one. That's me though. Do I practice zodiacal releasing? Yeah, every single day of my practice. Teach it 4 or 5 classes dedicated to zodiacal releasing in my year 2 program. It is an everyday part of my practice for sure. A progression is something that you consider. Yeah, definitely teach it in my 2nd year class as well. The way that I structure my programs, by the way, is year 1, you're learning ancient natal methodology and philosophy, which, even if you know something about astrology already, most people, our minds are just completely blown to learn more about the rationale behind everything in astrology. Where did houses come from? Where did a sign come from? How are they different from one another? What is a house and how is it different from a sign? Those questions, you get those questions answered, it's really satisfying. And So we work really methodically through the first year program, building up to the last 10 courses of the year, where we work with, individual live clients in the classroom, and then break down those workshops, practice with charts. And then in year 2, we start moving from how to read a natal chart in a more traditional manner to timing techniques. And so you move from sort of natal prognostication to forecasting in year 2. And then I have a horary course that I offer as well. Anyway, I'm mentioning that because they're all on sale right now through the Kickstarter. I'm going to close here for the day. I really appreciate all of you guys hanging out and asking such great questions. I hope that you guys enjoyed it this month. Just kind of a fun way to shake it up. Usually you guys know that I release like 4 videos, and each video has the rising sign horoscopes for the month ahead in the elemental families. And this year I just decided, for the end of the year, be kind of fun to just do it all at once, and maybe ring the bell a little bit for my Kickstarter as well. So here is the link to the Kickstarter in the live chat one last time. Thank you all so much for supporting my work. We're trying to get to 300 backers today. See if we can push over, getting close to the halfway marker. 691 is our target for the year. So if it's amazing how astrologers today can, the astrological industry is growing because people really value astrology. It's a really amazing thing that, when I first started 10 years ago, the pathways to, developing a career and supporting yourself, making a living, having a business as an astrologer were very small, were very limited. A lot of it was just teaching classes in person and doing readings. And of course, one of the nice things about, the internet age, I guess, is that we can teach classes online. I can make content all year round, and then I can fundraise, and just, even a small portion of my audience chips in, and it supports me, and it supports my family, and it helps me build my business, and it helps me build all the cool things that I've been doing over these years. We've built a yoga studio. We built a community herbal medicine garden. I've been able to hire staff to help me. So many things that I'm able to do because the Kickstarter goes off well every year. So yeah, I just really appreciate all of you and the support that you give me. And I hope that you guys have a really nice December. Next week, we're going to be talking about Jupiter-Saturn in depth. So to add to your understanding of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, wherever it may be falling in your chart, we'll be doing a couple of talks on Jupiter and Saturn next week. So that's what I've got. Thank you all for tuning in today. I really appreciate all of you, and we will see you again.